and welcome to Viewpoint. I'm Rahim Rahimtullah. Joining me is James Sherr, Associate Fellow of the Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House. Mr. Sherr, many thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
You're here in Kiev. You've been taking part in a forum on regional security, specifically the militarization of the annexed Crimean Peninsula. Give us, if you can, just to start, perhaps an overall view of your talk there.
Well, I wanted to get across some fundamental points about Russian thinking and strategy.
Yes, because you focus a little more widely on the European response.
So, to some extent, I was focusing on where Crimea fits into an overall Russian view of the world and strategy for breaking out of what the Kremlin sees, not just the Kremlin, but most of Russian opinion, sees as a Western geopolitical and civilisational encirclement, driven both by NATO and the EU, which they regard as two sides of the same coin, ultimately in both cases directed to a large degree from Washington. All of this designed to weaken Russia, isolate Russia, fragment Russia, and in the end, destroy its regime and its state ideology. And that's really the way they perceive it.
This is the view in the Kremlin?
This is the view in the Kremlin. It is a perfectly honest view, stitched together of half-truths, misunderstandings, misconceptions, fed by a very Darwinian view of the world which they have. And as Russia's power has grown, so has the determination to push back. So what we see rightly, and what Ukraine rightly experiences as a war of aggression, is part of what the Russians see as a strategic counter-offensive in which they are trying to do to us everything they accuse us of trying to do to them.
Absolutely. And so in this context, then, the Maidan Revolution that we had here 2 years ago, in this worldview, that was a Western plot, was it not?
Absolutely.
This was engineered by Washington, and therefore the annexation of Crimea was the only response from the Kremlin.
The Russians, for a long time, had elaborate plans for seizing Crimea, which is one reason why this was done so efficiently and so well. But the political decision to actually do this, and do it when it occurred, is very much is directly related to Yanukovych's fall from power. Had Yanukovych still been president of Ukraine, Russia would not be occupying Crimea today, though they would have far more influence than they had before, because their view always, the defense view in Russia, is that Crimea, it's not only for them part of their identity in Russian, it is a key, it's a key space in the whole strategic matrix. It is vital to their defense perimeter. So thanks to what is going on in Crimea with its current militarization, Russia is not only turning in the Black Sea into an area it militarily controls with the ability to deny access to other powers if it wishes to, but it's actually now will be able to project its own defense perimeter into the Eastern Mediterranean.
Yes. I mean, this has implications for the Middle East as well.
Absolutely.
Turkey, Syria.
So my starting point in the talk I gave is that Crimea really is a linchpin holding together two key theaters in Russian strategy, European and global. And Middle East is part of a global policy of realizing, turning into practice what Russia regards as recognition of its equality.
Yes, I mean, this is what it's all about, isn't it? This is about Russia asserting itself on the world stage, trying to say, look, we are just as valid and equal a partner here as the US. If the US brings Russia to the table and starts negotiating with it, that's already playing into this narrative, isn't it?
It depends how you negotiate. What the Russians have managed to do in Syria is dismantle the whole architecture of security with all its imperfections that the United States had constructed. And in the course of that, what's occurred with migration? A quarter of Lebanon's population are now refugees. Jordan is at risk of being destabilized. Jordan, which is a U.S. ally. The Gulf states have lost confidence in the United States, which plainly has no strategy about Syria. The West has had no strategy there, just a narrative, just a moralistic story about what should and shouldn't happen, a set of wishes. The only strategic players in the Middle East have been Russia, Iran, and Turkey. And that is why another major objective of Russia has been to isolate Turkey from its NATO allies and provoke Turkey into taking stupid actions.
Such as shooting down Russian jets.
Which I don't think was a stupid action, but it immediately, because, you know, the Turks shot down this Russian Sukhoi after a number of overflights and a number of warnings. And this is, you know, absolutely unacceptable. Turkey's a NATO ally. NATO issued pro forma support of Turkey, but the response immediately brought out all the divisions inside NATO, which the Russians wanted to see. They have a concept in their military operations called razvedka boyem, which is intelligence by means of combat. You punch someone and you see how he reacts. You see whether his friends support him or whether his friends pull him away.
Absolutely.
You then make all sorts of judgments. Since everything started in Ukraine, the Russians have been pushing and probing every single line that exists. And the line separating NATO and non-NATO states is absolutely not sacred to them. So as a result of this, they have succeeded in greatly alarming, creating a real sense of threat in Finland and Sweden, which are both respectively neutral and non-aligned states. And we're now even thinking about joining NATO. They're pushing in all directions, trying to see where the points of strength are, where the points of weaknesses. And the problem is the West has lost so much expertise, so much experience in dealing with this whole Russian approach that people have no longer understand the necessity, when this occurs, of registering a response.
I wanted to ask you about this. So, because, I mean, the way you pointed out, the way you lay it out here, it all sounds extremely coherent. We can see Russia's actions in Ukraine, in the Middle East, its global ambitions all seem to cohese into this one view. And how well is this understood in Brussels? By what I'm understanding from you, not very well.
It is far better understood than it was 2 years ago. And certainly in the places you would expect. If you look at national armed forces, intelligence services, counterintelligence services, there's been almost a mental revolution over the past 2 years in understanding Russia. But if you look at the wider political space, you look at national parliaments, you look at opinion leaders, you look at people who publish newspapers, you look at even people who make decisions, governments, prime ministers, the understanding is very uneven. It's very spotty. And what we still see, unfortunately, is the tendency to apply a Western template of rationality to Russia's behavior, which I am arguing with you is perfectly rational. But it's a different rationality. One thing that's completely different, two things that are completely different. This regime is not guided, as our countries are, first and foremost by economic realism. Okay? So they understand all the economic pressures they face pretty well. They are not stupid about these things. But they are guided by geopolitical thinking, and their view, quite correctly in my estimation, is that the West is at least as weak politically as they are economically, and they see the political factor as the decisive factor. You win the political argument, you win the geopolitical struggle, then you have the economic terms you want.
And they're willing to exploit this, aren't they?
They're willing to exploit it, and they're willing to take risks.
Mr. Sherr, we're almost out of time, unfortunately. No. So finally, though, just to sum up, given that we have these major divisions in the views of the world and the fact that the West is looking at Russia in a rather incorrect way, we might say, going forward, then, what do you want to see change in Brussels, in Washington, that is going to counter Russia?
I think the West should the West needs to regain confidence in its own strength and use its own strength in an intelligent way. Today, far too many people are afraid of Russia's power and our own. And the Russians see it. They know they are greatly outclassed in every material objective dimension of international power. But they also perceive that we are afraid to use the power we have. That's what needs to change.
Well, Mr. Sherr, it is a very interesting question, of course. It's still a work very much in progress. But thank you very much for joining us here on Viewpoint. That's where we'll have to leave it today.
Thank you very much.
You've been watching Viewpoint. I've been joined by James Sherr, an Associate Fellow of the Russia and Eurasia Programme at Chatham House. That's where we'll have to leave it today. Many thanks for watching, and do join us again.